out of sequence here, but anyway, this is my good friend Steve Rossell, and he has had the privilege of flying so many great airplanes over the years, and we visited earlier today and talked about your early days and when you started flying and so on and so forth. I'd like to pick up about when you were 16 years old and you just left the military academy and what your next step was going to the military, if you'd mind picking up right there.
Well, at 16, my first step was going to the Winchester Airport, which was just a little grass strip in those days in the country, and learning to fly. And I had a cousin that Archibald Cary Randolph that had an OX-5 Pitcairn, which was a World War I airplane.
At one time, there was an OX-5 club.
Yes.
And I presume you belong to that club?
At one time, but
Yeah,
that's years ago.
Yeah, the OX-5 was World War I engine?
Yeah.
World War I.
Yeah, exactly. It had the old, well, the Liberty and
Liberty
and you know the cylinders were separate on the crankcase, in the case of the engine.
Yeah. Well, it's a great afternoon, a Friday afternoon in Northern Virginia, and we're at the Hazy Air and Space Museum, Smithsonian Institute, right outside of Dulles, Virginia, very famous Dulles Airport. And I would like to introduce a real gentleman of World War II fame, a gentleman named Steve Rossell. Nice to see you, Steve.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here with you.
Yeah, okay. And we're going to kind of start at the beginning, not clear at the beginning, but Steve tells me he was born in 1921.
21.
That was a good year. That was a good year. It was a roaring 20s.
Yeah.
Roaring 20s. So, Steve, go ahead and tell us about when you first started flying and what kind of airplanes you flew and so on and so forth, and where were you?
Well, I was in Randolph Macon Academy in Front Royal, and I went to, I had a friend there named Updike that was flying over in Winchester out of a dirt little grass strip. And
That was obviously the nickname, Uptight, right?
Updike, no,
Updike, okay,
not Uptight, but Updike.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, there were two really great guys that had the little operation at Winchester during maintenance and a couple of airplanes, and I had a cousin that had a 1917 OX-5, Curtis OX-5 there.
Very, very famous engine of World War I.
It sure was.
Engine. Yeah.
But anyhow, I would go over to Winchester and I save a few bucks where I could get into that old J2, and finally, after about 8 hours, I was soloed.
Now, when you say J2, would that be a Piper airplane?
That's a Piper airplane, the predecessor.
How much horsepower did that airplane have?
That one had 35 horsepower.
35 horsepower, J2.
Yeah.
It would be a very collectible airplane nowadays.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And graduated to the J3. And my next stint of flying, I had on my parents' insistence that I go to college. I went to VPI, Virginia Tech, it's called these days.
Virginia Tech.
Yeah, and that was one of the first, what was it, CAA?
CA, well, I think it's CAP, is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Training program. Okay.
Come back to that last question, last one. They went to college.
And there was some sort of government assistance in those years, and what was that?
Well, it was at that point, it was called the CAA training program. It later became something like CPTA or something like that. But I was a freshman at a rat at Tech at that time, and I had enough flying time, which nobody else did around in the class, and I got into the program very easily. And we had Canadian fleets for training planes.
They were manufactured in Canada.
Yes, the original fleet was a Canadian, and so I went through that entire program and came out with a private pilot's license.
And what year was that?
See, that was 1939, 1940.
Boy, that was rare. You were a rare bird, so to speak, in '39 to have a pilot's license.
That's right.
Think about this, you know, just very well. To start with, it was kind of expensive.
Oh yeah.
And was very few airplanes available in those years.
Oh, very few, very few. I was lucky to have a cousin that had the OX-5. And we used to go around barnstorming with a guy named Pinky DeGrange, who was the parachute jumper, and we'd haul him around in that OX-5 and get in the cow pasture and make a few passes around town so people would come out and buy rides and fill up the hat, hopefully, when Pinky would...
that was the good old days, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was early days of aviation compared to today.
Okay, tell me when you found out that we're really at war.
Well, I tell you, I was then at the University of Virginia in the School of Architecture, and it was a Sunday afternoon. I was working on a project in the lab on a big watercolor picture of a bell tower with trees around it and so forth. And I had a little radio, and there was a radio in Washington, station in Washington you could pick up. It was just music, and I had that going and working on my drawing, and all of a sudden the radio quit. I said, "Good Lord, what's wrong with this?" And then the voice came on with the announcement that the United States has been bombed by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And that was quite a shock to everybody at that point in time.
Yeah.
So very soon thereafter, I went down to Bowling Field and signed up for the aviation cadet program.
Okay, Bowling Field. Now, where was that located?
Bowling Field was on the Potomac River out of Washington, D.C.
Okay.
A little bit.
Oh, is it across from Reagan National?
Yeah.
I know exactly where it is.
All right. You've seen it a million times flying in there when you're airliner.
There's apartment houses there
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, you signed in, and what was the reason for going down there?
To get into the cadet program, the Air Corps cadet program in those days.
Called the Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps. I had quite a bit of flying time by then in Cubs and the OX-5, so I went in, they said, "You have to have a physical." So I went in, and this gentleman there looked at me and he said, "What do you see out that window?" And I said, "Well, I see a tree and some shrubbery out there." And he said, "Okay, you passed your physical." And that was
in other words, they needed pilots.
Yeah, they needed pilots,
they needed
and they were particularly pleased to have people come in that were already licensed, that wanted to go into the Air Force. It was Air Corps in those days.
Is that your... whenever you're ready, Cameron.
World War II, we're in World War II. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. I can remember that also. I was around in those years, and so they're very eager to find pilots. They found a live pilot with several 100 hours and at least a private license. So that must have been really a good time for you.
Well, it was. Of course, I was put into the aviation cadet program, and the first thing I had to do was probably one of the worst, was to ride a train to Nashville, Tennessee. which was staging area for aviation cadets. And from there, I was sent to Santa Ana, California. And at Santa Ana, the cadets from there would be sent out to the various training bases through California, Arizona, Nevada, all through that part of the world. And while there, and before going much farther, a rather senior officer came through one day and said, would any of you cadets that have previously had some flying time be interested in going through the Royal Air Force training program? So, man, my hand went up right away. And I was accepted and sent to Mesa, Arizona, to Falcon Field. Falcon Field was a training base that was under the British Union Jack. It flew two flags out on the field, the American flag and the British flag, and the RAF blue flag with the round hole on it.
In those days, the British were really desperate for pilots.
They were,
being attacked.
and the reason that I got it was because they didn't want to have to start from zero to get a guy up to speed. They wanted somebody that had already at least gone to what was a private ticket. So I went through that complete Royal Air Force training and went over and got a little bit more flying there in their training situation. And
in California or Arizona?
No, Arizona. Went over to England. And the first thing I knew, there was an opportunity to get into the American Air Force, which I opted for, and I was sent back to the States.
But you did go to the UK.
Yeah, I went to the UK, after my RAF training in Arizona, and back to the United States, and into the training program there. I went to Randolph Field, and from there they sent me to Craig Field in Alabama.
Randolph Field in Texas.
Yes, Randolph Field in Texas.
You could not be an aviator without going through Randolph Field sometime in your lifetime.
In those days, yes.
Yes, okay.
And so I went through what they called instructor pilot training. And from there, I was sent, of all places, to Malden, Missouri.
You were a flight instructor by this time?
I was a flight instructor.
Okay.
Okay, so, and the things that went along pretty well, I opted out of that, and by talking to a few people I knew, and got excited.
Pick it up again. Malden Field or something was that?
And you were training in Missouri?
Yes, at Malden, Missouri. I was a flight instructor on the old BT-13.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
Yeah,
what
that's all
airplane you
right.
were using.
And then I went into the back seat of AT-6s, the North American AT-6s.
The Texan.
Yeah, as instructing. And I thought, boy, this is really not for me for a long time. And I had some friends.
You either like instructing or you don't like it. And the BT was a rather dangerous airplane after they kind of found out about it.
I had a lot of time in it.
It was snap roll on its back.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I wasn't brand new to flying by that time.
Wasn't your first rodeo?
No, and so from there I got an opportunity to go to San Antonio and get into the training program that led to me getting into fighters. And
now, we talk about California, Arizona, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas. The reason for that, good weather.
Good weather, yes.
Good visibility.
Good weather, good visibility.
And good training.
And of course, as an instructor pilot, before getting into fighters. That was a great advantage of not having to walk out into a foggy, rainy morning and with an instructor and with a student with you and not be able to get in the air.
Well, the North American AT-6, the Texan,
Yep,
was a phenomenal trainer for the fighters.
that is correct.
And what was your first training for? What kind of fighter was you looking at first of all?
The P-40 was the first one
The P-40.
that I got in, and got a few hours in that.
Well, I'd like to get a picture of you in the P-40. Is that possible that we can do that? And we'll move to another location?
Stand by. Whenever you're ready.
I understand that you also are a seaplane pilot.
Very much so. A good part of my career in early life after the military was in amphibians.
And when you say amphibian, what does that mean, amphibian?
That means that the aircraft is capable of landing and taking off on both land and water.
And this aircraft behind you, did you ever fly this airplane? And what is it?
The one behind me is a Grumman. What's the name?
Goose.
The Goose, yes.
Start again, go on, go, start.
Yeah, I flew the Grumman Goose for Superior Oil Company out of Lafayette, Louisiana, because they had offshore oil rigs, and we used the intercoastal waterways, saying I'd take a bunch of passengers down, and they'd send a boat in, and I'd land somewhere in protected waters, and transfer them out the nose onto the crew boats that would take them offshore.
How much experience have you got in the Grumman?
The Grumman Goose, the G21, I was in the G21A. I've got a little over 5,000 hours in it.
That's a lot of seaplane time.
Yes.
In fact, I don't know anybody that has as much seaplane time as you do.
Well, I don't know about that, but in addition to that, we had widgeons in the company. We had two or three mallards. I flew those. I love the mallard, flying that. And then for good executive airplanes, we had converted A-26s, the Douglas A-26s.
But you couldn't land those in the water. But
No,
one time.
couldn't. But they were great, running from Lafayette, Louisiana, or Houston out to the head office in California.
Well, isn't that great? Well, we'd like to move on to another airplane at this time.
Stand by.
Well, I've always been interested in seaplanes. In fact, Pan American Airways, the Pan
certainly.
American Clippers. If it wasn't for Pan American Airlines, we wouldn't have known where the islands were in the South Pacific in World War II. They never really got credit for that. And of course, they made open sea landings, and I presume that you've done that.
I've done that quite frequently and taken quite a beating at times from the swells. You know, you don't see the swells until you touch down, and all of a sudden there's a wall of water in front of you.
Tell me, starting at the beginning with the Grumman factory.
Yeah.
What was the first amphibious that they made that you got to fly?
The Widgeon was probably the first one. I bought one of those and had an operation out of New Orleans called Pan Air Corporation.
What year was that airplane manufactured?
That airplane was manufactured in the late war years, so I would say 45, 46, in about that period. And there were two versions of the Widgeon, one with a rather flat nose.
I wasn't aware of that
Yep.
until you spoke about
and then the one that I had was a newer one, which was much better, was a deep rounded nose, very similar to the airplane behind us, the Goose.
Okay.
And
then the next in line was what?
well, the Goose. My
the
company had widgeons, geese, mallards, etc.
When you talk about more than one airplane,
Yeah.
you call it geese.
Well, we did ourselves because we had a couple of gooses.
Okay. I tricked you into that, didn't I?
Yeah, you tricked me into that one. But
Anyway, from all the people that I've ever talked to, said the Goose was a wonderful flying airplane.
I think it's one of the best you can fly in rough, heavy seas. It's short coupled. The Mallard is a delicate airplane in a lot of respects compared to the toughness of the construction of the Goose. And so if I had to go in offshore, which I had to do a lot of times, saying I would always want the Goose, not the Mallard, and never the Widgeon. It's a bit too small.
And then you flew the Mallard.
Oh yes, quite a
which
bit
was,
of time.
which was a very a beautiful airplane. In my
A
opinion.
lovely airplane to fly, and we use that also for a lot of executive use. You know, besides going out with the crews and dropping crews off to get out on the boats to the rigs. But we did not go offshore in the Mallards and land, except in an emergency when the seas were really good.
Then the last, as far as I know, amphibian that Grumman built was the Albatross.
Yes, it was.
And if you notice, all these are birds.
All of them are birds.
With webbed feet, maybe?
Amphibious birds.
Amphibious birds. Was that
Yeah.
clever or not?
Yeah, that's very clever and very
Very
good.
clever.
Right.
Well, I want to jump to another airplane, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. During that period, I flew the PBY a bit too.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about
yeah,
that.
because
Well,
but,
tell us about that. Who was the manufacturer and what was the difference?
Consolidated on the West Coast.
Was that be Consolidated Vultee?
Yes, it was.
Okay, and what engines were on that airplane?
1830s, I believe, 1850s. What was it?
Well, it'd be a Pratt & Whitney, it'd be
Pratt-
1830s.
1830s, Pratt and Whitney's, yeah.
Yeah,
And that's a wonderful, dependable engine.
yeah, it was a great,
Yeah.
great engine. Hamilton Standard propellers.
Ham standards, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to the next airplane. You got to plug your mic in.
He's on.
Am I on?
Oh, is that a remote?
Good.
It's radio.
Yeah.
Who am I
Radio.
ta-
It's
I'm
transmitting.
sorry, I'll never say another damn word. Well, Steve, I'd like to, whenever you're ready,
We're rolling.
I would like to talk about an American kid, young man, going across the North Atlantic and going to England for training with the RAF. And how did you get across the North Atlantic?
Well, that came a bit later. I got into the RAF, and wouldn't you know, they put me into an RAF training base that they had in Arizona.
Okay.
And so I went through that all the way through that, and what their primary was in AT6s, and that was an advanced trainer in the American schools.
Yeah, okay.
That was their primary, but I went through all of that and got my RAF wings on this side of the pond.
Do you still have those set of wings?
Oh hell yes, I'll wear them sometimes.
Okay, next time I see you, I expect you to have
Yeah,
them on.
yeah.
But then, did you have a British instructor or American instructors?
Both. We had some contract Americans.
Who translated for you?
Well, it wasn't too bad. They
They were beginning to speak American.
I'm basically English heritage,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
but it wasn't too bad.
Okay.
It was rather amusing.
Now you've got
Yeah.
your RAF wings.
Yes.
Which are priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very proud of that, and in getting them, I also did a training, a flight training exam with an American instructor and got my American wings. Because I'd gotten my RAF wings on an approved training base in the United States.
Was there a ceremony?
Yeah, there was ceremony. I mean, and but anyhow, that's the way I got my RAF wings, and I had the choice of when I graduated, going on to England with them or going into the American Air Force, and I chose to go into the American Air Force.
Okay.
And I was immediately sent to Randolph Field and in Texas, in San Antonio, and from there into Richmond, Virginia, in P-47s. And that was a big hunk of iron for a kid coming out of training in the small things. But it was wonderful. It was wonderful. I survived it all, and I loved it.
Well, now, did you get to fly any of the British airplanes?
Oh yeah, yeah. While I was still in the British, we had on the base, we had Spitfire and a Hurry, as we called them, a Hurricane, on the base, and they had a couple of the small training planes.
Did you make a judgment between the Spitfire and the Hurricane as to what you preferred or what you thought was the most?
I didn't have much time in either one of them, but I liked the performance of the Spit better. It was more communicative with the pilot. I mean, anything you did, boy, it responded to. It's more responsive.
It had a Merlin engine?
Rolls-Royce Merlin.
Rolls-Royce Merlin engine.
Yep, inline engine.
Do you remember how much horsepower it developed?
If I say 1,600, I may be wrong, but I think...
I was thinking around 1,500,
yeah,
1,600
I would think it was about 1,600. But I'll tell you one thing, when you got to full throttle, it was really ready to go.
Now, did the airplane have a tendency to torque off?
Yes, of course, because of the amount of power of it, but you rode a rudder on that one and kept it straight, and away we went.
Okay, I'm looking at an airplane behind you. Would you identify that airplane for me?
May I turn around? That is a Hurricane.
That's a gorgeous airplane.
Yes, that's...
Basically had about the same size power plant, would you say?
Yes, it had about... It was a cousin, more so to speak, of the Spitfire, in that it was built by another company.
Oh, okay.
It was not built by the same, and it was one of the very good fighters of the two. They were great.
Now, looking at the scoop on the belly of that, what is that scoop on there for?
Well, bringing in air to the engine from below. There's a radiator there, an oil cooling radiator in those.
But this was a water-cooled engine.
It was a glycol cooled.
Glycol. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Very
it was.
exciting.
It was different. I think I thought the Spit was much more responsive, and it just was like the Cadillac over a Model T.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. But anyhow.
Well, we're going to move on.
All right.
To the
Fine.
next airplane.
Just in your own words, go ahead.
All right. This is a Royal Air Force uniform with the authentic Royal Air Force wings, and the Canadian Air Force had very similar wings, but it had a big C around the RAF, which was the Royal Canadian Air Force.
And that's the Royal is the crown.
Yes, the crown on the top, and it's typically British in a lot of ways. The decoration around the name, and that's quite authentic. But that's a Canadian.
Talk about it.
That's an R-2800 Pratt Whitney engine. 18 cylinders, 2 rows of 18 cylinders.
Now, sit down and talk.
All pilots have their favorite airplane, and I suspect you're no exception to this.
No,
you have something that
I reckon not.
You really preferred, and tell us what your favorite airplane of your career is.
Well, in fighters, the favorite airplane of mine is directly behind us, the Republic P-47, and this is one of the latest models.
And if I remember correctly, they had a nickname for this airplane.
Yeah, they called it the Jug.
If you look at the side view of the airplane, it is a big jug.
It really is. It's probably the most lethal fighter that the world had known in World War II years. It had 8 50 caliber,
Oh, really?
8 guns firing forward on it, and it packed a heck of a lot of lead.
And you carried bombs also?
Oh, bombs, napalm, if they wanted to burn something up. If you notice on the wings, I don't know, but they're racks. No, they're not on this one. But there are racks on the wings that would carry bombs or napalm tanks, and it was just lethal. This was a lethal airplane, and it took a lot to shoot it down. I mean, it would take a lot of fire.
Really tough airplane.
Yeah, very, very tough.
Now, did you have armor plate around you?
In the back of me. It came up the back and up just behind your head like that. So, and it sort of cut in, fit your shoulders, and the armor plate came up behind your head, but nothing on the side.
Now, you were the power plant for this airplane?
Is a Pratt Whitney R-18.
2800.
Yeah, 2800. This is a 2800, R-2800. And there were several versions of that. And there's as the plane developed into the N model, which was the clip wing one.
Oh, this is a clip wing model here.
I don't know that I didn't look at the wingtip. Yeah, but the clip wing one was the N, and that was probably the most lethal of all of the P-47s. It was a great airplane, and I had the privilege of being in an outfit equipped with P-47Ns.
Okay. And the propeller, you remember much about the propeller?
Well, I know it's a Hamilton standard. The early P-47s had the electric.
I think that this is electric on the one behind it.
Yeah, I think it is too.
That's what I was prying out of you.
Right, and this.
I'm checking to see if you really know this airplane. You know, it's only been 60 years.
I know it. I know it. I forgot.
You're doing phenomenal. Boy, you just remember everything. It's really
No,
really
I
fun.
really don't. I mean, gee whiz, first time I've thought about this in a long time.
Yeah.
But it's a great pleasure to be here and be with you.
Well, tell me about your squadron.
Well, like all squadrons, you had some real good guys and some, you know what kind, the others, and generally pretty good skipper. I mean, they were always had a lot of time. My first squadron commander had a tour and had shot down a couple of Jerrys, and he was very, very good and capable. And as we said in the I don't know whether I can use any language here or not, but
yes.
He wasn't a smart ass. He was one that really helped the pilots along that were coming up.
And what was your mission?
Well, the mission, I was on strafing, primary strafing and bombing missions, and then later on I was put into the Air Force's first air reconnaissance group, and we were sent to with all brand new P-47Ns, no armament, and we were sent to a base. We were sent to Alaska, a base, and flying out of there, and we were flying weather recon up to the Arctic and around and back in. We had 7 to 8 hours range on these with the drop tanks.
Well, tell me, were you a lot of IFR weather, instrument weather?
There was a lot of it, and we didn't know what we were doing.
Did you have a gyro horizon?
Oh yeah. We
wasn't just needle ball.
No. We had a full panel. We had an autopilot in them also.
But you shot radar approaches or ILS approaches?
ILS or needle ball airspeed sometimes.
Well, you know, that's always been amazing to me as the World War II crowd, how stripped down these airplanes were compared to the the modern airliners now that have every instrument that you need to do a good job of instrument flying. But well, okay.
But
great.
you didn't ask me why we were up there getting weather stuff.
Well, tell me.
All right. We didn't know either at the time. We'd been flying this weather reconnaissance way up in the Arctic and back down into the States. And about the time we did in August, I think it was, and they told us, well, we're not going to do any more of these runs up over about the Arctic Circle. We were getting weather data all the time, the air mass movements and so forth. And so about the time we got back and were told we weren't going to be flying those long missions, and we could fly a long time with the drop tanks on it, the atom bomb went off. And then we realized what we were doing, we were the weather guys that were getting all of the Arctic and the weather movement, and they wanted it the weather to be such when they did this, where the movement of the fronts were moving air out to sea rather than over China and killing a lot of people from fallout.
Isn't
It was
that
quite
interesting?
it was quite a complicated
Interesting,
thing,
Very interesting. I had never
and
heard
nobody
that
knows
story.
that. I mean,
I say I never heard that.
well,
story
it was
before.
primarily our flying, and what we done was not publicized.
You see, that's one
You
of the
might call it
best-
secret, but it was.
Best kept secrets. I thought possibly you were mapping weather that was going to go to Siberia and Russia too.
Well,
but
we
not-
were mapping the weather. We were getting all of that, but it was primarily for the atom bomb.
I noticed something that you said that eventually you went back to the States. Well, that was before Alaska was a state,
Yeah,
and now they will correct you and say the lower 48.
yeah,
They're very sensitive about
that's
that.
they are indeed.
But because you see that, like I say, that was before it really
Yeah.
was a state.
But I'll tell you, it's quite something on these long 6-hour missions, the better. And these being with all the your paraphernalia strapped to you.
Flotation of gear.
Oh yes, and you know, Mae Wests and parachutes and all that.
Well, I have to ask you one personal question. Did you have a relief tube?
Yes, all aircraft.
Hey, go tell me. Well, you were just talking about all of the equipment that you had on it. Did you
Yeah.
have a firearm?
Yeah, I had a firearm. I had a 45.
And you're sitting on a parachute.
Sitting on a parachute.
Did you have a dinghy on board?
Sometimes,
But you had
not always.
You had a life preserver.
Always.
And what was the life preserver called?
The Mae West.
Now, why would they call it a lady's name by the name of Mae
Well,
West?
you see, when you put that on under your flying suit, it was very similar to the way Mae West looked in her dress.
Okay. Well, that, but it would keep your head above water.
Yeah, it would. It would. It would keep you floating till you froze to death up in those
You're
latitudes.
gonna freeze to death anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But-
Okay, well, we're going to move on to the next aircraft.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, wow, that's a heavy airplane.
16,287
Well, that
pounds.
was more bomb load than the B-17.
Yeah.
Think about that.
850s, rockets. Man, these outer, they're not on here, but they're outer arms where they carried rockets.
Yeah.
This one has obviously
Where
been a
is the-
training plane.
Where is the exhaust?
This is a D model.
Where
See,
is the exhaust on this?
what, on this airplane?
Yeah.
Out of this cowlings right here.
Oh.
But you have an exhaust that goes through and drives a turbo supercharger for your pressurization.
Oh, it was a pressured airplane.
No, into the engine.
Ah, I see. It was just supercharged.
Yeah.
engine. Yeah, okay.
Stand by. Come back to you in 3. Go.
Well, you had just finished your cadet program and got your wings and I guess one of the first fighters you ever got a chance to set in is a P-40. Is that a fact?
That is a fact. P-40.
And-
Curtis P-40 with the inline engine. It was quite an airplane to me at that point in life.
Well, that was before Colonel Chenault's time, or right during? Was the airplane
It was
famous?
about during. That was
The
in,
airplane was very famous by
yeah.
then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was in '43,
I see. Okay.
and my flying and fighters went all the way up through '45. I think when the atom bomb went off when in '44,
I believe 45.
'45. Well,
Yeah.
and I was in a P-47 Thunderbolt squadron at that time, and we were demobbed after the bomb went off.
Well, I, of course, never flew a P-40, but I remember the guys coming home from the war saying it was quite a great airplane and had a lot of power and a lot of speed down low, but it didn't have the capabilities of going high altitude.
No, it did not. It
But,
had no supercharger. It only had the internal engine blower. But as you know from flying even radials that weren't supercharged, you lost it at
yes.
pretty low
Well,
altitudes.
I remember the guys talking about, we got a little propaganda in those years. We didn't give the Japanese much credit, but the guys that came home said that zero would turn inside them and outclimb them. And
Without a
and
doubt, without a doubt.
The only downfall it had, it was very flimsy and
Yeah, exactly.
wouldn't take much of a hit.
I can't take credit for having been in that, involved in any of the fighting with those where they were involved.
I'm always,
Whenever you're ready, Captain. Okay.
well, I was just talking about the Japanese Zero, what a phenomenal airplane it was, and how it coincidentally looked an awful lot like the Howard Hughes Racer.
Absolutely. And I think they stole the designs on that.
They were good at that
yeah.
in those years.
But they were very lightweight, and they couldn't stand up against the American fighter, which was much more firepower,
yeah.
heavier, and but the Zero could outmaneuver a lot of them because of its lightweight, and
See, it seemed to me like it had a Kawasaki engine in it.
she was,
I don't know.
I've reached the age where I don't remember all of those things that I knew back then about
You've done remarkably well.
Engines in
Well,
them.
the P-40 is, after the war, there were a dime a dozen, and all of us kids wanted a P-51. We didn't want one of them old P-40s.
Exactly.
Now they're precious.
They are, and a lot of South American countries gobbled them up and used them in their air
I
forces.
forgot about that.
Yeah.
They had.
But it was a very good airplane, nice flying.
There are probably some of them still down in Chile.
Oh yeah, I would think so.
The Chileans didn't throw anything away.
No.
Well, I think that's about all we have to talk about right this minute, and we'll catch you next time around.
Well, very good. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, for sure.
Right. Thank you.
Would you be so kind as to join me next week?
3, 2.
Would you be so kind as to join me next week with Tales of the Hangar by Captain Don? Like I say, what a gorgeous airplane example. And of course, we've heard about Curtis all through your aviation career.
Oh, absolutely. In the early 40s, this airplane was really the mainstay of the modern fighter of that era, the late 39, the 30s, until the Mustang came along.
Yeah.
And
Well, you were practically home then, weren't
up
you?
practically home. I had a motorcycle and I'd ride up to Warrenton whenever I had a
Tell
chance.
me, did you ever buzz your dad's house?
Oh, you better believe it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did
And
that.
Now he tells
You know that
Did
all.
you ever fly under a bridge?
No, I stayed away from that, but I did a lot of other crazy things.
Yeah.
But this was the first real fighter that I flew in the early days.
It had a great sound.
Yeah, I
Great
did.
sound.
From this, I went into the P-51, and which I'll always remember as a very great one. And then I went into P-47s, the P-47N, which was the clipped wing one, right at the end.
Yeah.
Carried a heck of a big bomb load, had 850s in the wings, and you could hit a building with those 850s and it would explode.
Just hose it down.
Absolutely.
Hose it down.
Because that much firepower on explosive 50 calibers would just take a building apart.
You know, World War I, the 50 caliber was an anti-tank gun.
Yeah.
And the hobbyists today are building 50 caliber rifles.
Really?
Oh yes, they are. It's still one of the most outstanding caliber of, and I'm not a gun person,
Yeah.
but I
Well,
hear
it
that
packs,
you guys-
it packs an awful lot of power.
Yeah, for sure.
It really is.
Okay, well listen,